Good evening. My name is Carol Cropscott, FPSA, and I'm so happy to be judging your images because I used to be a member of the Plano Photography Club. My photo background includes a membership in PSA, the Photographic Society of America, since 1977, and I write the Just for Beginners articles there. I've been doing that for over 10 years. I also have a business called Creative Photo Slideshows. I love your topic of perspective because it is one of the best ways to make your images unique. And being unique is important if you want to create memorable images and if you want to win photo contests. If you can take a picture of a scene so that it looks different from just standing there in person, then you have a photo with more impact than a snapshot. There are lots of different ways to change the perspective to something other than the usual line of sight. So let's see what you all have tried. I'll comment first on the perspective aspect and then sometimes on the other photographic aspects. Peachy focus. I gave it 9 points. This first image is an example of someone trying to present a different version of these jars and sign than what is normally seen. It took me a while to decipher the sign, and then when I did, I saw the humor. I don't feel that the out-of-focus look of the entire image is really an element of perspective. Perspective is more about the line of sight, like whether you're looking up or down, or something is in the distance, the spatial relationships between the objects. Escalation, 10 points. This is an example of using a vanishing point to emphasize the perspective of the escalator getting smaller and smaller. One idea for a more unique perspective would be that you could have placed the camera lower on the surface of that side rail that you did use, and that would exaggerate the perspective. Another way to emphasize the vanishing point would be to crop most everything else out of the picture. Just a stroll, 11 points. This very low perspective leads my eye directly to the people taking a stroll, which is a good thing. To improve this image, I would have removed those black blobs in the grass, and I would have taken the photo when the people were more centered and more visible. Another easy idea for improvement of this photo is to crop off the bright white area on the left, because anything bright like that draws the eye away from the main subject. Feeling tall, 11 points. This does tell the story of someone feeling very tall, and the body shows texture all over, which is good, and it isn't too dark like it could be when you're looking up like that and you have a bright sky behind it, and the sky isn't too bright. This is an effective use of perspective by looking up to emphasize the height of the statue. If I had shot this, I would have taken lots of photos as I moved around, left, right, back and forth, and also shot with more room around it, so I could find a different composition so that the statue's abdomen or the big blank areas of sky weren't so prominent. Forest Ascending, 11 points. Third place by Todd Matthew. This is a good example of looking up and accentuating the vertical nature of the forest scene. I see that the top area is framed on the left and right by the trees, which have bent in due to keystoning, and that's a nice effect. And to make it even more effective, I suggest darkening the bright area of whitish green forest on the left underneath the tree, and that would have given a vignette effect so that it would keep our eyes inside the picture. Scroll down the lane together, 11 points, second place, given to Nak Wong, and this is a lovely portrait with a very good composition. The vanishing point of the path takes me right to the couple, and an even more version, though, could have been taken with the camera down a little lower. The curve of the tree branches reminds me somewhat of a fisheye lens, which is considered part of creating perspective. It's also a composition technique called framing. If this were my photo, I'd crop a tiny bit off the left side to remove those mundane buildings in the far background that give this otherwise nice formal portrait a snapshot look. I'd also brighten the image to take away the gloominess of it, and maybe a slight vignette around the edges of the whole picture would make the couple appear to be the brightest part of the picture and lead your eyes there. The Fairest Cape, 12 points and first place to Jeffrey Sarer. Don't you wish you were sitting there right now? I do. Nice low perspective to give us a feeling of being right in the beach, even though it's a rocky beach. I hope the photographer worked the scene and took a variety of shots. The ocean and distant hills are blurry and very dominant in this composition, so a way to present the scene without so much emphasis on blurry areas would be to make the pebbly beach be a larger portion of the image. And that's the end of the entry level group. Now for the intermediate level. Go with the flow, 8 points. This looks to me like a nice painterly macro shot of a leaf, but the title makes it seem like it might be an aerial view of a river. Not sure what it is, so it's hard to give an opinion on the topic of perspective, and I don't get a sense of scale. I can't say that the viewpoint is accentuating height or size or how the pieces of the composition interact with each other. The next photo is Bubbles in the Air, 8 points. The subject matter is intriguing. I can't say I can figure out what it's supposed to be, so I can't say whether the perspective is normal or special. Am I looking up or down? Can't identify the center of interest. It's an overall pattern. The background doesn't make the bubbles look closer or farther away. I'm sorry I'm so confused, and I can't give any suggestions for improving the composition to help the photographer make her point better. The next photo is called Texas Rose Wells, 8 points. I think the photographer's goal here was to show the sense of scale between the person and those huge rose things. I don't consider this picture an example of using camera perspective to tell the story. It's sort of a normal record shot of a person looking small because the other items next to it are large. Scale in perspective is when one thing looks unnaturally bigger or smaller because of the composition, or because of the camera's position, or because of the lens distortion. The next photo is Covered Bridge in Oregon, 8 points. This perspective of looking through something to another thing is a popular way to use perspective. It gives a sense of depth to the image. A suggestion for improvement would be to have the area at the other end of the bridge not be overexposed. The leading line of the bridge needs to take us to something we can see and appreciate. You could expose for that distant area and then lighten the bridge interior in post-editing. That's what I would have done. Soaring Strength, 11 points. Here's the perspective of looking up. The statue is well exposed with details in the shadows and highlights. The sky and clouds are just the right tone and set off the statue without any distractions. The sense of soaring is diminished, though, by the horizontal lines of the arms that makes it static looking. The image is static and soaring at the same time. A slight tilt of the camera might have given you more dramatic interpretation of the statue. Next we have Country Road, 11 points. Here the perspective is that the tall trees are giving scale to the small, lonely country road. Using monochrome also allows us to feel the hugeness of the vertical trees as compared to the road. If we were looking at a color scene, we would have noticed the leaves and started looking at other things. To improve and emphasize also the perspective, I suggest the photographer could have tried sitting down on the road and shot from that lower camera angle. Parking, 11 points. This is almost an optical illusion instead of a camera-made perspective. I'm not sure where the mural ends and the parking lot begins. You fooled me. I can't tell if it's part of the mural. In any case, we do see a unique relationship between the ocean and the parking lot. Good eye by the photographer. I can't suggest anything to improve the image because I really don't know what there was there to work with. Perspective of library at night, 11 points. This photographer has a good eye for spotting things that would make an interesting and unique image. Other people could drive by this library and never see this pattern. And the way each window relates to the next window and is getting smaller, it all adds to the feeling of perspective. What I would suggest to improve the impact is to clone away the upper left section and make it be just part of the dark side of the building. If you all cover that area with your hand right now, you can see how those windows pop. The next image is called Tatlin Sentinel Dallas Art District. I gave it 11 points. The perspective here is the relationship of size and height among all the objects. The bright yellow sculpture feels close to us, and the buildings behind it add depth to the scene. I think the photographer spent time in post-editing because the buildings are nice and straight with no keystoning or curvatures. I'd suggest that the magenta color be removed so the clouds and the brick building would look more natural. I think the buildings are too blue, which often happens when using the Vibrance tool. The next photo is called Can You Hear Me Now? 12 points. The perspective is a normal line of sight looking straight at him, but it's unique because it's such a hard viewpoint to actually capture. Notice that there's nothing distracting in the surrounding water. The mouth is definitely emphasized by the camera's view. The sharpness of the face could have been improved by using a faster shutter speed and smaller aperture instead of the 1/50th of a second and the f5.6. When I want to stop action, I plan ahead and I use shutter speed priority mode and let the camera use as high an ISO as it needs. When I want sharpness due to aperture, I use aperture priority mode and then I pay attention to the shutter speed chosen by the camera. Building, 13 points. And third place to Karina. Great perspective of looking up, great composition with the way the building is placed in the picture, and love the exposure with detail in the clouds in the building. I think the monochrome keeps us focused on the building and clouds rather than being distracted by, a brilliant blue sky or a silvery framework of the building. Capital, 13 points. Second place to Jack Wang. You stood in just the right spot and got down just low enough to capture the perspective of the Capitol being reflected in the pool. This gives the photo great impact. Of course, the clouds help a lot too. Good detail in the buildings. There are no distractions anywhere around the edge of the image. My only suggestion for improvement would be to make the columns of the far right building be perfectly vertical. The next image is called Anchors Away. I gave it 13 points in first place to Leslie. This perspective of looking down onto a scene is all about showing the relationship between the various subjects. The man closest to us at the bottom right emphasizes the point that the main scene is down below us. And that scene has the added impact of the shadow of the main man. It's amazing how all three men are looking at him and how even their body language points to the main subject. And how the main man is framed by the objects around him. The two tires, the black angle thing at the upper right, and the curves of the rope. Our eye is forced to stay in the picture, and yet there's plenty of items of interest to take the time to look at. That's the end of the intermediate level. Now for the advanced level. The first photo in advanced is called Tuscan View. I gave it 10 points. This perspective here is the foreground and looking through it to what is far behind it. There could be more of a sense of depth in the foreground if it were a larger area, and also if the background weren't overexposed. I might have backed up and sat down and then shot straight ahead to give more of a sense of depth from the pathway out to those distant fields. Another suggestion is to remove the bright areas on both the left and right sides of the picture because they're distractions. Either darken them or clone over them or crop them out. Windows gets 10 points. This is like an Escher drawing, and I don't know if I'm coming or going. I see arches more than I see windows. I don't know which aspect of perspective the photographer is going for. I don't feel depth or a sense of scale or anything in particular being emphasized by this viewpoint. I'm sure there's something in the scene that struck you as being illustrative of perspective. Perhaps you've included too much in this image for me to get your point. The next image is called A Bug's View, 11 points. Looking up to see the two flags blowing in the wind like this is a good perspective for a unique photo, and I like the symmetry too. If this were my photo, I would have used the shadows slider in post-editing to brighten up the flags in the building. When I take flags against a blue sky like this, I also brighten up just the flags with the other sliders, such as for the whites and the contrast. The next photo is called Bridging the Gap, 11 points. It's a great looking photo, but I don't have a clue what it is. That makes it difficult for me to make a comment on the perspective. It's probably not the normal line of sight. If I were standing there in person, what would I be seeing? How did the photographer change it? Was it with a lens or the camera position or something else? The next photo is called Apples. I gave it 11 points. Looking down onto apples is definitely a different perspective than the usual. Or maybe someone stacked them up vertically with a lot of care. Maybe you shot straight on. I can't really tell for sure. As for the composition, if you were allowed to do it, you could have arranged them so that the stems were in some sort of pattern, just to make the photo itself interesting beyond the perspective aspect. Winning is a matter of perspective, 12 points. Getting down to the eye level of the main subject is always a good perspective. It gives your main subject more importance than if you were looking down on them from your own eye level. It has helped you emphasize the point of your picture. I myself would have slightly darkened the crowd in the background in post-editing. Neon street light at City of Fort Worth. It is 12 points. Shooting down from a building gives you the unique perspective you can't get in everyday life when you're walking on the sidewalk or driving in your car. This photo is well composed, and it shows me a lot of what it's like to be there. I appreciate how everything is straight up and down without any distortion. I like all the details, and the colors look appealing. Unexpected Visitor, 13 points. Honorable mention to Ming Yang. Do I see a shooting star visiting you? Here, a wide-angle lens provides the unique perspective, being able to see the sky and the ground simultaneously. The tent gives us scale. The way those objects relate to each other is also part of the point of perspective. And the photo of the night sky and the lit-up tent is very, very well done. Take Me Out to the Ball Game, 12 points to Ron Lin. This is an honorable mention for Ron Lin. This is the aspect of perspective where you use lens distortion to add uniqueness. It changes the viewer's sense of depth on how the various objects relate to each other. The shot is still taken straight ahead and probably from eye level, but although it's a normal line of sight, the fisheye curvy effect is making the scene especially interesting and eye-catching. The use of symmetry here is very effective in presenting the story very clearly to us about what we're seeing. The next image is called Surrounded. I gave it 13 points in third place to Aaron Lesher. And I am dizzy. This view of looking up actually makes me feel dizzy. So the view has more impact than a simple let's look up the skyscraper kind of photo. The composition with the tall buildings on the left accentuates the wider building on the right. I don't know if other shots of this scene, say if you took it after you took a step to the left or right, or with the camera angled a little differently, I don't know if those photos would be any better or just simply different. I hope the photographer took lots of views from different spots, different foot locations, and used a variety of focal lengths. The next photo is called Library of Congress, Washington, D.C. I gave it 13 points in second place to Linfen Wang. The photographer placed his camera low enough to capture the entire room from floor to ceiling. The wide-angle lens did a great job with this perspective. As for the photo itself, there are no distractions all around the edges of the photo. Very nice. Climbing Huayna Picchu. I gave it 13 points in first place to Carol Barlow. Here's an example of what a super wide-angle lens does. You get a great sense of depth, a sense of scale. You're accentuating the story of those steps. Of course, we wish we could see the man with more sky above him, but at least this way I get more of a feel for the dangerous nature of this hike. And that's the end of the advanced section. Now let's start the masters section. The first one is called The Puck Stops Here. I gave it 10 points. It's interesting how there are 3 pucks and the number 3 is in the photo. The perspective is that we're looking at these items from about their same eye level. This causes the narrowing of the thing that they're on as it recedes into the distance. The closest red puck does look a little bit larger than the other ones, but not so much. The effect would be greater if they were spaced farther apart or if the camera were even lower. The view from below, 10 points. I like the idea here, and I wish I could make more sense of what I'm seeing. Before looking at the title, I didn't figure it out. And now that I know it's a person being viewed from below, it's an intriguing image, yet I feel a need to see that second foot as clearly as the other foot that I can tell it is a foot, in order to make sense of the whole image and appreciate the unique perspective. Step up for a closer view, 11 points. I read the description as meaning looking up, and yet I sort of thought I was looking down. It's a little confusing visually for me, but this perspective aspect is good. I don't know how I would make this any better other than taking the shot from a different spot, such as if I moved a little to the left or the right or backwards or forwards. Italian rooftops, 11 points. Looking out from on high is certainly a more memorable perspective than looking up from the street. Other aspects of perspective aren't really here though, like receding into the distance or accentuating one object's size. So this photo sort of looks like a straight shot out of a window, except for the beautiful coloring. Tractor at market, 11 points. This is a fisheye view that does look different from a straight shot. It could be even more imaginative looking though if the photographer had stooped down to take the photo or held the camera above her head. Those other camera positions could have eliminated the mundane items in the background, which don't really add anything to the picture. Garrett and Dodge, 11 points. It's a nice example of how perspective emphasizes the depth between objects. The relative size of the horse's head is so much larger than the man's head, and how they're positioned in the composition shows the perspective. If this were my photo, I'd do some post-processing on the dark areas of the horse's head to make it stand out better. Cropping off the left tree makes a world of difference too in emphasizing the horse. Caddo Wake, 11 points. Great use of accentuating the relative size of the boat engine with the smaller stuff in the background. I get the feeling of depth. A regular straight shot out of the back of the boat wouldn't have given that same perspective. The reason this didn't get a higher score is because I couldn't figure out what it was to start with. I saw the word Yamaha and thought it was a motorcycle. If I hadn't been to Caddo Lake myself, I might not have understood the scene. Looking up at lady, descending, 11 points. Here is looking up perspective. Otherwise, it's a normal shot without any distortions, which you often see in perspective. If I were to improve this picture, I would brighten up the lady in post-processing. I'd also have taken several shots of her in hopes of getting her head positioned better so that it could be seen better. Building in the morning, 12 points. That is stunning morning yellow color here. The perspective of looking up makes the building look spectacular. Having clouds in the sky would probably detract from the impact of that morning color cast. These final few images are all so spectacular. I wish I could have given them more awards. People coming and going, 12 points. Here we have a vanishing line that is also at an angle. Great perspective. The people in the foreground are so much larger than the people in the background, just like it's supposed to be. The people even grouped themselves into a nice composition, didn't they? Spiral staircase, 13 points, honorable mention to James Stover. Our sense of depth perception here is thanks to the perspective of looking upwards. And because the staircase gets very visibly smaller as it twirls around, that adds to the perspective. How great this effect is actually depends on the lens he used and the focal length. And it's good to point out that what we see at the farthest point away from us is very clear and bright and well exposed. That's very important. The next photo is called Everything's Relative. 14 points. Honorable mention to Valerie Johns. The perspective here, of course, is looking down, but it's the items within the composition that really make this special. The chain in the lower right is angled in such a way as to bounce our eye back to the man, and the angled gate at the top left does the same thing. And there's no doubt what the center of interest is here, because every secondary item is pointing right back to it and framing it, such as the blue rope and the orange life jacket, etc. Starry Sky from Navajo Cave, 14 points, third place to Charlotte Hasty. Here we go from inside a cave to the outer reaches of space. That's a superb sense of scale. In person it wouldn't look quite this great. The wide-angle lens gives us some super perspective. The next photo is Ophelia. I gave it 14 points. And second place to John Lehman. Well, you got down to her eye level, that's for sure. It's a perspective that's definitely not one we see very often. When we're in the water ourselves with other people, the water is never this calm. So you got those reflections that add a lot to the serenity of the scene and also lead our eye right to the main subject. Star of the Car Show, 15 points, and first place to Sam Wilson. Congratulations, Sam. The Star of the Car Show is also Star of Tonight's Show, meaning I give it the Best of Show title. I've taken many a photo of cars myself, so I really appreciate this outstanding image. It takes a special photographer's eye to see this view from this perspective. No distractions from other cars, no people, no buildings in the background. And the starbursts are that extra special thing that adds an extra special touch. And the blue color of the car is unique in the way I'm assuming it is reflecting from the sky, and so it coordinates so well with the sky. Congratulations to all the winners and to everyone for taking their time to change their perspective and try to get more interesting shots. Go ahead and take the shot you think you want and then change your lens or move the camera lower or higher, move your whole body lower or higher, step back closer in, get closer to one of the subjects so that the other objects look different than reality, or simply look for a scene that of itself gives us a different perspective. You can start with the simple looking up and down shots and then move on to placing the camera way down low. When you can use a super wide angle lens, you can put one object very close to you and see how the perspective affects the background. I have tried to offer you some ideas that would encourage you and inspire you to move around a bit and use different focal lengths. I think we can easily fall into the trap of shooting everything from eye level. I know I do. As I get older, I don't get down low so often. I can't really pay attention to how ordinary everything looks, and I have to remind myself to do that. So I wish you all the same reminder. With that, I thank you all and say good night.